Hello, everyone. Once more, we are doing an interview. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Robert Venditti, who many of you may know from many a thing. Green Lantern, Hawkman, Exo Manowar, and we've got some new projects coming. And I can't not mention Wesley Dodd's Sandman. Just a little nod there. But he's got a whole bunch of stuff coming out from Bad Idea, including Planet Death, which is first on the horizon. We're going to talk about that and a bunch more a day. And I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me on, Sash. I appreciate it.
So, for people who may not have seen issue 0 of Planet Death, because there was an issue 0, what is it about?
So, Planet Death is a story that I co-wrote with Derek Kolstad. He's the screenwriter and the creator of the John Wick franchise of films. Mm-hmm. And he had this great idea to do sort of a really sort of wide-scale science fiction war story, so sort of in the vein of like a D-Day invasion type thing, but it's an alien world. And so our story is about a main character named Corporal Scott, who is part of this battalion of human soldiers that has to invade this alien world and destroy this giant weapon. If they destroy the weapon, then the soldiers get to go home. But on sort of the initial invasion, the battalion gets wiped out. Corporal Scott's all alone. And so now he has to figure out how to execute this mission all by himself. So This is the story of this one guy going across this landscape and encountering these insurmountable odds and trying to overcome them so he can get back home.
You've worked in sci-fi before because your first work was Surrogates, right?
Yeah, that was my first book. Yeah.
So what is it about sci-fi as a genre that appeals to you?
That's a good question. My all-time favorite movie is Blade Runner. And so I really like sort of the cyberpunk sci-fi type stuff. I read a lot of Philip K. Dick when I was younger. 1984, George Orwell is obviously one that I really enjoyed too. I don't know what it is about it that appeals to me. I think a lot of it is the imagination of it, and you can kind of tailor the world to be what you want it to be in order to thematically go after whatever it is you're trying to go after, So if you're doing something thematically and it's set in the real world, it's in the here and now, you kind of have to deal with the rules and cars look like cars and buildings are buildings and there's no time travel. I don't know, whatever the rules are of our modern day. But in science fiction, you can kind of take little pieces and change them to get it to what you're trying to get to thematically, And so with something like the Surrogates, it's very much our world, except everybody's living through robotic android representations of themselves, In Planet Death, it is a very grounded story thematically in terms of it's just somebody trying to get home to their family. But we're able to play with different elements of it in terms of setting and the aliens that they go against and the ships and the armor and all these kinds of things, and just kind of change the pieces that you want to change in order to make the sci-fi setting better help you get to the theme that you're trying to go after.
You're also working on Survive and Ordained. So how's it been juggling so many projects at the same time?
Yeah, I enjoy it. I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. It definitely is, it's a lot of work, but I enjoy doing different projects and I really enjoy doing different genres, so like Planet Death is science fiction. Survive is very much like a espionage story set aboard a submarine that's sunken at the bottom of the ocean. And there's an American spy and a Russian sailor aboard the ship, and they're the only two ones to survive the crash. And so they basically go to war against each other in this battlefield that's 300 feet long, Ordained is much more of a crime story. It's about a priest who gets called to a hospital to perform last rites for a dying patient. When he gets in the room, he finds out that the patient is an old Irish gangster who's dying of old age. And he sort of confesses all the things he's done in his life. Then the gangster ends up making a miraculous turn, and so now he has to kill the priest because the priest knows all the secrets. But the priest wasn't always a priest. He used to be in the special forces, and he found his faith in combat. And so, it's sort of a grounded crime action story, So different genres all at the same time. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of juggling, but I tend to be pretty organized as a writer, and I can keep things straight as I'm working on them. And it's kind of really part of the business. If you want to be a full-time comic book writer, you're going to have to juggle multiple projects at the same time
and get a good system going.
Yeah. It's taken me a while to get there, but when I was at DC, there was at one point I was working on a double ship book. I'll join the Green Lantern Corps. That came out every 2 weeks. at the same time, I was writing other series for them, and then still doing other projects elsewhere too. So you really get in the kind of have to get into the place where you can learn how to juggle all those deadlines, because especially in a monthly series, what a lot of people don't realize is sort of the relentless treadmill of content generation that has to go on there. And so every 28 days, a book has to leave for the printer. But artists, not a lot of artists can draw a full comic book in 28 days. And so a lot of times, especially on Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, I would write issue 7 for Rafa Sandoval, and then issue 12 for somebody else, and then issue 16 for somebody else, and then issue 8, and then issue 13, and then issue 17.
Yeah.
So you're even juggling multiple arcs all at the same time,
How do you manage to keep that all straight?
Journaling, I write a lot of things down, and then again, I just think it's kind of the way my brain works. I'm not a good like stream of consciousness writer. A lot of people are really good at that. Joshua Dysart's one. I'm a huge fan of his work. He's kind of a stream of consciousness process to his work, and it really works for him. It's just not really how I'm able to do stories. By nature, I tend to be really organized and methodical about the way I build them. I think that helps me keep them straight, when I have to juggle them later on.
Do you also think that helps when you're working with some of those, say, like DC characters with long histories to sift through?
Yeah. I didn't read comics at all growing up. I started reading comics in my late 20s. And so I don't have a lot of pre-existing knowledge of the continuities of these characters. Most of what I know, about Superman or Spider-Man or whatever, I know from films and TV shows and stuff like that. So when I build my pitch, I usually do it from a perspective where I'm not dealing a lot with continuity, because I'm not going to go read a bunch of those things so that just to write a pitch for a job I might not get, But after I start working on the character and I know I'm going to be writing it, then I'll go back and I'll read, I read every issue of Hawkman that there was. I read hundreds of issues of Green Lantern to get ready for that stuff. And I do think it helps me stay organized in that respect. But also when you're working for DC or something like that, you have editorial backing you up. They remember a lot of these continuities, and they, it's their job to know those things. And so they can kind of keep you on the right track if you go astray.
So I came into comics a bit later too. So what brought you in?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I had taken creative writing in high school. I was an English major for my bachelor's degree, and then I was in grad school for creative writing, and I was doing fiction writing, prose. And there was somebody I worked with at Borders Books and Music in the warehouse. He was like a really big comic book reader, and he would always talk to me about comics, and I'd never really had read them before, but he told me about this one story arc that sounded really interesting, and it was Kurt Busiek's Astro City Volume 2, the Confession story arc.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, and so it was really interesting to me, and so I went and found those issues and read them, really liked it, and went and tracked down kind of all the back issues of Astro City. I think there was maybe like 23 or something at that time, and read all those and decided that I really wanted to try to write comics, because I like the idea of doing these really sort of literary character-focused style stories, but set in a genre setting, and then having an artist that bring the art component to it, and being collaborative in that way. That all seemed really, really interesting to me, and so I stopped writing prose and started writing comics.
How's the collaboration process been on these works for Bad Idea?
Oh, really good. Yeah. I know the Bad Idea staff. I've known for quite a while, because when I worked at Valiant, a lot of them were at Valiant. And so we have a really good working relationship, and they're very collaborative too. Very hands-on and very supportive in terms of wanting the story to be the best story that it can be when it leaves the door, And so that's great. But working with the artists, Tomas Chiarello, at Death, he's somebody I've wanted to work with, for years and years. And I wrote the story specifically for him, not knowing if he'd actually be able to draw it, but he is who I was imagining in my head, And so he's wonderful to work with. Doug Braithwaite on Survive, I worked with him on the event comic I did for Valiant called Armor Hunters. And so it was a great opportunity to be able to reunite with him. And then Trevor Hairsine is somebody that I worked with only briefly for a couple of issues at Valiant of X-Men of War. Always wanted to go back and work with him again. And so being able to work with him on Ordained, I mean, these are all artists who are masters of their craft. And so it's wonderful to be able to work with them and collaborate and see what they bring creatively to the story. And they're all very good storytellers in their own right, in addition to being artists. And so, yeah, I couldn't be happier with the way the books are coming out.
Yeah, I got to read issue 0 of Planet Death, and it does look absolutely gorgeous. I got one of the backdrops for behind us just because like they're really, really nice.
Yeah, Tomas is he's just a force of nature,
Hmm.
just the way he draws the armor and the movement in the armor, and you can feel the weight of it, and so much emotion in the faces, and the
Hmm.
expressions. It's not an overly dialogue heavy series because there is so much action, and so when you have those moments of character and those moments of dialogue between two people and things like that, you really need them to land, and you really need to understand the character's emotions, and he just really excels at all those things. And so really, really happy, really happy.
Hmm. Now, speaking of like the writing process, since you shifted from doing prose to doing comics, what did you bring with you from the prose writing experience over to the comic writing one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think probably more than anything, sort of the interiority of the characters.
Mm.
Like comics is obviously a dialogue heavy medium, and you rely on dialogue like you do with film and TV to convey the story. Whereas prose, you have a lot of interiority,
Yeah.
going on. And so when I write my scripts, I do deal a lot with the interiority of the characters and what they're thinking, and all those kinds of things to communicate the emotion of it.
Hmm.
It'll never hit the page. You'll never hear them say these things out loud or what have you, but
Hmm.
I think it helps. I hope it helps the artist
Hmm.
kind of understand the emotion that we're trying to convey in those beats to go along with the dialogue in a way where sometimes just dialogue wouldn't do it, because dialogue read on paper could be interpreted through a variety of different emotions if you're not sort of clear about that, And so I think that's probably the thing that I bring from prose the most.
Do you ever think about flirting with, like thought balloons or those kind of things? I know that people have varying ideas about whether they're cheating
Yeah.
or not. So,
Yeah, I would totally do it if the story called for it, and I've
Mhm.
done certain things, Hector Hammond has telepathic balloons,
Yeah.
and like certainly in my Hawkman run, we used interior monologue captions a lot,
Hmm.
written in hand like they were the journal entries that he had done. Hank Howard Pizza Detective, which is another series I do for Bad Idea. He's a noir sort of, Humphrey
Hmm.
Bogart type character, and he monologues a lot in his head. But haven't really, I don't know if I've ever done a thought balloon, but only because the situation doesn't call for it. Like I
Hmm.
would not use one if I thought it was what would be best used for the story.
Yeah. So because you've done lots of your own work and lots of like pre-existing characters, do you prefer working with one over the other?
I don't. I liken it to like, you know, flexing two different kind of creative muscles.
Hmm.
Like when you do something that is creator owned or your own ideas, you're building that world, you're building those characters, and you kind of have creative license to do whatever it is you want to do, and it's very freeing in that regard.
Hmm.
That's one kind of creativity. When I work for something like DC and I work on a branded character, and you're working on a character with all this continuity that's also taking place inside a wider universe that
Hmm.
has also its own rules and continuity, these are like boxes that you get put in. And when you
Hmm.
get put in a box creatively, you come up with creative solutions to get out of that box
Yeah.
that you would never have had if the box didn't exist in the first place, right? And
Hmm.
so, I mean, there's an entire school of thought that constraints breed creativity, and so
Hmm.
uh, I very much think that's true, and especially when you have an event that you suddenly have to tie into, and you got to feel like it works organically with the story that you're already doing and all that kind of stuff. So I liken it to working out two different types of creative muscles, and I think working in both capacities, I hope makes me a better writer in both as well.
Hmm.
It's like working out arms one day and legs another day,
Yeah.
or whatever.
No, can't skip either.
Yeah.
So since you came into like comics and the comic fandom later and you didn't have quite the same breadth of history with the characters, when you started to get into it and you started to get into writing some of like the pre-existing characters, was there anyone you really wanted to work on and did you get the chance to work on them?
Superman was always my favorite, not just comic book character, but
Yeah.
one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, because the Christopher Reeve films when I was younger
Mhm.
just had a huge impression on me, and it's really strange that I didn't go read Superman comics after that. I don't know why. I was always a reader. My mom was always giving me stuff to read, but just comics were just never something that was on my radar. And so Superman was definitely at the top of that list. I'm not a Batman guy. No desire to write Batman. Don't ever want to write Batman. But as I was at DC and I would encounter a lot of other characters, I was like, I want to write that character. And so, for example, when I first started reading comics and I was working at DC and just trying to learn about the wider universe, I came across the Shade in James Robinson's Starman series.
Yeah.
And I just loved them. And so when it came time for me to write Hawkman, I kind of figured out a way to make the Shade a part of Hawkman's story, and so things like that. Freedom, but there's others that I had no idea who they were. Freedom fighters I'd never heard of, never read anything about. Even when I was at DC all those years, still didn't know who the freedom fighters were until they came and asked me to write it, and I went and looked into it, and it was great. So yeah, there are still some ones I would like to write. I would love to do the JSA as a team book. I would love to do Nightwing, because to me Nightwing is kind of the Clark Kent to the Batman family in the sense that he's kind of the brighter, hopeful one, not so brooding. But I don't know if we'll get back to those characters one day or another. I got a chance to do Wesley Dodds, so that was another JSA character that I got to write, which was cool. But I mean, I would love to do Wildcat and so many.
What is it about the JSA characters that appeal to you?
I think it's the pulp nature of them. I was very, very close to my grandfather growing up. He'd always tell me stories about his Uncle Joe, cracking peanuts and listening to The Shadow on the radio and stuff like that. And I don't know, just the way that the original JSA lineup from the Golden Age really captures that kind of pulp feel. You can see that in Wesley Dodds, especially. You can see that in a character like Our Man. It just really, I don't know what I would call it. I wouldn't call it nostalgia. It would just, I would just call it something that I've just kind of always enjoyed, something that appeals to me for whatever reason, I like the hopefulness of the JSA characters too. Along the lines of Superman, like I tend to be a more hopeful person by nature, and I tend to write stories that come from a place of positivity in some way, I hope. That's just kind of how I'm wired, and I think the JSA embodies that sort of hopefulness, which is why I have no desire to write Batman. Batman is dark and brooding, and I'm not discounting Batman as a great character. I know lots of fans and people love him, and there's great runs on Batman that I enjoy reading myself. That are wonderful, but creatively, for me to get in a headspace and to work with a character, I lean towards things that are brighter and a bit more hopeful, I think.
There's also the fact that with the JSA, because a lot of the earlier ones are straddling that kind of transition period between the pulp and the superheroes before it becomes like super dominant as a genre, that you can play with some of those more mystery themes or thriller themes or those kind of things. They don't feel out of place in any way.
That's 100% true. Yeah, it's 100% true. Like Hawkman and Wesley Dodds are on the same team in the JSA, and I wrote Hawkman as a sort of Indiana Jones in space kind of character, and I wrote Wesley Dodds as a very grounded noir detective type character, and so the idea that they both inhabit the same team in that way, super interesting.
Yeah, and the fact that they can both be on the same team and it doesn't feel odd or out of place. You see them on the team, it's like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when I was looking into Bad Idea, because I know like they're newer on the scene, they have a no digital type of models. So do you also have a preference for the physical over the digital?
Yeah, I don't have anything against digital. For me personally, I like to read print because I spend such a large amount of my day already looking at a screen. Like you do as well, right? Like at some point, I just don't want to be bent over a screen anymore. I just want to sit back with a book and feel the paper, so that's always my preference, but I certainly don't have a problem with digital comics. They look great on the screen, the colors really pop and things, and I know a lot of people read them that way.
Well, there is something really fun about having them and being able to, I assume also, especially when you've actually written them, to finally be able to see it all come together.
Yeah, that doesn't ever get old, I will say. I'm trying to think. For a while, there were some things I did digitally that only existed digitally. I did a run of on Superman called Superman Man of Tomorrow, and it
Mhm.
was originally we wrote them for they were standalone stories we wrote to be distributed through Walmart's, and
Mhm.
the first three came out, and then COVID happened, and the printing plants shut down and everything.
Mhm.
But we were really ahead on it, and we had several more stories. I worked on that book with Paul Pelletier. We had several more stories that were already in the can, and so DC came to us and talked to us about releasing them digitally, just so that there could be content coming
Yes.
out during COVID because they couldn't print comics. And so they did that. And so there was a span of time there where there was like 8 or 9 stories that only existed in digital. I didn't have them in print, but luckily they ended up collecting them in a trade. And so
Yeah.
I've got them in print now. Yeah.
So, since you've been working on all of these different things over the years, what's your favorite thing that you've worked on?
That's hard to say. There's definitely things I'm very proud of. Like I'm really proud
Mhm.
of Superman 78, and just I love
Mhm.
that version of Superman so much. To be able to work on that story, working with Wilfredo Torres was amazing. Jordi Belair, that was a great experience. Really loved the Hawkman run that I worked on. Working on those first 12 issues with Brian Hitch.
Mhm.
I mean, he's such an amazing person. Not just an amazing artist, but an amazing storyteller, and also remarkably fast. He
Mhm.
penciled all 12 of those issues, inked the majority of it, and did all the covers monthly. Never
Mhm.
shipped a book a day late. Which is
Mhm.
remarkable when you look at the amount of detail he put into those pages. I'm really proud of Ordained, the story that I've got coming up. That's one of my favorite things I've done. You kind of tend to lean towards the newer ones.
Mhm.
But also, I'm still proud of Surrogates, which was my first one. So not every project comes out exactly the way you want them to,
Mhm.
and there are some that I, maybe wish had gone a bit differently, but not to the extent that I would regret doing them or something.
Mhm.
Because with every project, you learn something, and
Mhm.
it makes you a better writer. And so, they're all positive experiences in that way.
Mhm. How do you feel that your style has changed over time?
I don't know. Maybe fans would be able to answer that one. I mean, I do think I'm more competent at it. Like when I started writing Green Lantern, I took over after Jeff Johns. I'd written maybe 5 comic books in my life.
Mhm.
Um, and so here I am taking over this major character that's part of a 4 and then became 5 book family of
Mhm.
titles, part of the DCU. And I think if you read my beginning of my Green Lantern run, New 52, Green Lantern number 21, and you go all the way through to the end, 87 issues later with Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps number 50,
Mhm.
I think you can probably see the evolution of me as a writer, learning how to write for the monthly format, learning how to write within the DC universe, learning how to write, you know, books with one character and one lead and books with 4 leads. And I don't know, you just become better at it, I guess. You're never
Mhm.
going to be perfect at it.
Mhm.
I don't really get into the award thing too much, like the Oscars or the Grammys or the
Yeah.
Emmys, because the idea that something was the best thing that came out this year in terms of art is always sort of a bit incongruous for me, because somebody could think that I'm the best writer in the world and somebody could think I'm the worst writer in the world, and they're both correct, because once I write the thing and put it out there, it's up to the audience to determine for themselves what they think and how they feel about it. And as much as I love Mad Max Fury Road, there are people out there who hate Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
And so uh, you go into it knowing that you're never going to figure it out.
Mhm.
It's unfigure outable. So the best you can do is hope to improve and get better and learn along the way.
Do you enjoy, like, interacting with the fans and seeing the reception to all the various things that you do?
I do, yeah, I do. My experience has been, very positive in that regard. But I
Mhm.
also kind of try to foster that, I guess. Like I'm not
Mhm.
somebody who spouts a bunch of negativity online or anything like that. I mean, there definitely were people when I took over Green Lantern from Jeff Johns who were really, really harsh with me.
Mhm.
And I understand, because they're spending their hard-earned dollars on a comic book, and they expect a level of quality. But for me, I didn't really internalize it and let it get to me, because I knew that I was very new to this. And
Mhm.
the way I kind of liken it is like, if it's my first day on the job and I took over for, you know the best career salesman in the history of the company. And on my first day, somebody comes by my cubicle and is like, "You suck." It's like, man, it's my first day. Hopefully I'll get better, you know? I mean, everybody's had a first day on the job. And so the criticism definitely is there, but I try not to internalize it too much.
Mm-hmm. What do you find helps with that? Because I know some people have a hard time not internalizing it.
No, I think for me, I just look at how fortunate I am to be able to do what I do for a living. You know, like I come from a very blue collar background, you know, construction workers. My dad sold concrete. You know, I got one brother who's an electrician, another brother who's lays tile, you know, and I've been around that all my life. I know how hard my parents worked to be able to do things, and my grandparents. And I've had jobs ever since I was 12. You know, I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in retail, I've worked in sweatshops, I've worked in warehouses, I've done all those kinds of things. So for me to be able to make up things in my head and have people mail me a check for it is a real gift, you know. And I'm just going to take that as a blessing and kind of not let anybody ruin that for me, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have an extra soft spot for Ordained, and while it is the most recent, and I know what you mean about how like the thing you just made is like fresh on the brain, but what is it about it that you're particularly fond of?
I just love the story that we were able to put together, you know, and the idea of this this main character who did something terrible in their past and is trying to get redemption for it, and they become a priest and they spend their days absolving the sins of others and trying to help others through their faith, but helping others find forgiveness, but doesn't feel they're worthy of forgiveness themselves, you know. And I think that's really kind of relatable. You know, we've all made mistakes in our lives and that we kind of beat ourselves up over about. And I just love the way we were able to take sort of that theme and weave it through almost every single character in the story, whether it's, you know, the priest who's the main character, Roy, or it's the Irish gangster, Cormac Byrne, or it's Madison Torres, the cop who's, you know, investigating all these things, or even, you know, marginal, you know, sort of secondary and tertiary characters you meet along the way. We're able to take that theme and weave it through all those things. And so I'm really proud of that. And then, you know, seeing what Trevor's doing with the art and what he's doing with the characters and these beats, you know, not even the action, but the emotion and things like that, and really conveying that stuff. Just really, really proud of it.
You mentioned that you leave a lot of, you know, notes on internal like thoughts for the characters. Do those go to the artist? Do you give them like specific direction, or do you kind of leave them some space?
I don't give them specific direction. Like, they definitely have the creativity to do, but when it comes to the interiority, I'm not directing them to draw certain things. I'm more just sort of expressing the mood of the character in this panel, you know, so that they'll know what the emotion of it is as that line of dialogue is being said, you know.
Are you ever surprised by anything that you get back?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable to me what artists, when you're working with people like, you know, Tomas and Doug Braithwaite and Trevor Hairsine, and it's remarkable to me what they're able to convey with a pencil and ink. Like, I don't understand how they do it, you know. And art is so strange to me. Like, it's something I wish I would be able to do. And it seems like the human brain should be able to look at something and then draw it. Right? Like, I should just be able to make my eyes show, talk to my hand, and, you know, but like, it doesn't work that way. And so I have nothing but admiration for artists. And when you're fortunate to work with artists of that caliber, yeah, you get surprised every panel, every page, you know.
There's already been a bit of buzz building up behind Planet Death. So how have you found the reception to be so far?
So far, really good. Yeah, the 0 issues was received really well, which was great to see. July 9th is when the first issue comes out. And so that's when we'll have the big launch. Each issue is 40 pages. The fourth issue is 55 pages.
Oh, wow.
So these are really big, you know, oversized, you know, action-packed, you know, a lot of stuff going into these issues. And so response so far has been really good. Obviously, we hope that continues through the release. But we go into it knowing that we're putting out the best book that we could put out, and after that, like I said before, it's in the audience's hands, you know.
Well, it seems this like right now in general, it's a very exciting time in the comic space in terms of all the different things that are coming out. How do you find it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can remember when I started. So I started out working in the warehouse for a publisher,
Hmm.
packing boxes and things. It was a publisher called Top Shelf Productions, who's now an imprint of IDW, and they did
Hmm.
March, very famously, which won the National Book Award. They do a lot of literary style of original graphic novels. When I came into the business in 2002, there was no New York Times bestseller list for graphic novels. You
Hmm.
weren't seeing graphic novels at Scholastic Book Fair pamphlets, or
Yeah.
seeing them in libraries the way that we see them now, or seeing them taught in college curriculum like we do now. So to see the way the medium has come along, I don't even think the film aspect of it had really started yet. Like I remember the first like really big uh, comic to film announcement I remember seeing was 30 Days a Night.
Hmm.
That was like the first big one. And now you think of all the things that are on TV and in film that have been adapted from comics. So it's amazing to see how much more mainstream uh,
Hmm.
comics and graphic novels have become, to the point where even virtually every big New York publishing house, whether it's Random House or Simon and Schuster or Scholastic or Henry Holt or whoever, they all
Hmm.
have their own graphic novel imprint. So
Yeah.
it's really amazing to see the medium go that far in just 20 years. So hopefully that continues.
Well, you're also seeing books, like lots of them be changed. I know you've done that too for like the Percy Jackson series, like turning the novels into graphic novels. So how is that like?
I did that intentionally because I wanted to see. It does a couple things. One, it forces you to really pick apart a story. Like if you think about when you used to do book reports when you were in
Hmm.
school or in college or whatever, right? You'd have to sort of dig in on a story and pick it apart and figure out how this writer did what they did to achieve the story that they got.
Hmm.
Um, Adapting something really causes you to dig in and get out of where I always think about story and the way I always think about story, and put myself in the headspace of how other people think about stories. And so
Hmm.
when you've got somebody like Rick Riordan, who's one of the biggest writers in the world, and
Hmm.
I think I've adapted 10 of his novels, and so you
Hmm.
really get a chance to go in there and dig in and see how he does character and how he does plot and see those kinds of things. That's great to do. Um, but also, I wanted to just, having had my first book, The Surrogates, adapted into a
Hmm.
film, and having gone through that process from the point of view of the person whose material was adapted, I
Hmm.
wanted to see what that experience would be like as an adapter.
Hmm.
How do I take somebody else's material and adapt it into another medium?
Hmm.
And so those were two challenges that I really wanted to do, and I enjoy it. I think I've adapted 14 novels, and then now I work with Mr. Ballin, who's a very famous YouTube podcaster. He does strange, dark, and mysterious stories, and
Hmm.
I take his podcast episodes and I adapt those into short stories that are sold as collections in a graphic novel. And so um, I really enjoy that kind of work too, because, like I say, it forces you to think about story in a different way.
Has it now altered your relationship with having your own work adapted?
I never really, I never really was like sort of precious about that.
Mm.
You I did the story the way I wanted to do it, and it's always going to exist in book form. And if somebody else comes in, director, screenwriter, actors, and they want to
Hmm.
bring their own creativity to do their own thing, I don't really want to get in a position where I feel like I'm sitting on their shoulder managing their creativity. It'd be
Hmm.
like if you had a band and you made a really good song, and I came in and was like, I really like that song. I'd like to do a cover of that song. And you said, great, but it has to sound exactly like
Exactly like the
my
first.
version. Like, why would I want to do that? Like something about your song inspired me to want to bring my own creativity to it. And if
Hmm.
that's not what you want, then don't sell the film rights. It's
Hmm.
kind of my impression, my feeling on it. So um, if my works get adapted, I'm happy to have it happen.
Hmm.
Um, I don't write them to be adapted. I'm
Hmm.
not always trying to hit that Hollywood bullseye.
Yeah.
That's an impossible. That's mad. That way lies madness. I just write the stories to be comics, and if somebody comes along and wants to adapt them, that's great. and I
Mhm.
enjoy the process, and I enjoy seeing other people be creative. You know,
What's one of the unique elements of comics that you enjoy? Like something you can only do in the comic format?
the way you can really kind of control what people are seeing and the pacing of the story. I like the idea of the page turns and the way
Mhm.
you can use the page turns to do reveals. I like the way that each page kind of operates as its own story individually, and you can kind of have a
Mhm.
beginning, middle, and end of that page that leads you to the next page. You know, those are all things that I enjoy writing about the medium, but they also make it kind of hard to work in sometimes too. But again, uh, the constraints can breed creativity, whereas
Mhm.
prose, which I've written a couple of novels as well.
Mhm.
I mean, whenever you decide the story's over, it can just keep on going forever and be 1,000 pages. You know,
Mhm.
comics, you know, you have to live within a much tighter space, and you have to learn a real economy, because 20 pages of comics is not a lot of space
Mhm.
to give the readers a satisfying experience. Whereas 20 pages of prose, you can do a whole heck of a lot. You know,
Mhm.
20 minutes of film, I mean, that's almost a half-hour TV show. You can do a
Yeah.
lot. You know, so yeah, you have to learn to be economical with it. But uh, like I say, that's just constraints breeding creativity again. You know,
So, what's the constraint that you've encountered that you feel has forced you to be particularly creative? Or is there an instance where you can remember that it really forced you outside of that box?
crossovers and events.
Mhm.
Yeah. So when I was in the middle of writing Hawkman, right after issue 13, Hawkman got swept up in two crossovers back to back.
Mhm.
Only two characters at all DC. One was Hawkman, the other one was Supergirl. Got
Mhm.
swept up in two crossovers back to back, and so I had to do what was a line wide crossover called Year of the Villain, where
Mhm.
we had to bring in a villain and they had to take over the book for a couple of issues and things like that. And then right after that, Hawkman got infected as part of this infected crossover storyline
Yeah.
that led into Death Metal 2. I had to do both of those back to back, and I had to figure out a way to take the requirements of those stories and make them feel like they were an organic part of the series I was already doing
Mhm.
back to back, you know. And that was where I end up using the shade. You know,
Mhm.
I used Shadow Man as Hawkman's villain during Year of the Villain, and Shadow Man is a character who travels through shadows. You know,
Yes.
and so I ended up connecting that with the shade and bringing the shade into the story and making it another part of this. Carter Hall is on this adventure through time and space to learn about himself. You end up finding out the shade is a character who's also immortal, that he's known for a very long time. And they
Mhm.
kind of have this, mutual understanding and respect for each other because they're both immortal characters and things.
Mhm.
So you end up coming up with creative solutions in ways that you wouldn't have if that storyline had never, You're the Villain, had never come about, and I didn't have to do Shadow Man. I probably would have never put the shade in the comic. So
Mhm.
yeah,
I'm definitely glad the shade showed up. I'm always happy when the shade shows up. He doesn't
yeah.
show up enough, in my opinion.
No, he doesn't. He's a very, very cool character. Yeah. And DC has so many characters like that. There's such cool characters, and Hawkman was really an opportunity where I could do that. Like we used Madame Xanadu, we gave
Mhm.
Madame Xanadu and Hawkman a connection that went way back. And um, there's so many characters like that. Buona Beast, which is like a totally off the wall character, but
Yes.
such a cool character. Space Cabbie. I used Space Cabbie when I was writing Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. Like
Mhm.
DC is such a huge universe and has so many cool ideas. The new gods, to be able
Mhm.
to use Orion and Light Ray and Metron and all those characters, and so there's so many cool things you can, and that's what can be really really fun about working in a big universe like the DC universe. I mean, within the JSA umbrella, like if they wanted to give me an Hour Man 6 issue mini like they did Wesley Dodds, like or Wildcat or whatever, like I'm there for all those characters. Yeah.
With what you've been working on currently, you've been bouncing in between a couple of different genres. So how do you find it getting into the headspace for each when you're working on simultaneous projects like that?
Just practice, and I try if I can, and I 90% of the time I can. I
Mhm.
try not to write more than one thing in a day.
Mm.
Like this week I'm writing Planet Death. Next week I'm writing Ordained. Next week I'm writing Survive. So I can
Mhm.
kind of flush it out on the weekend, and then on Monday I'm now in Ordained mode, and I'm doing
Yeah.
that. And then go back to Planet Death again the week after or whatever. But so I kind of keep it separate that way, and try not to. I mean, it's exceedingly rare that I would have to write actual script on 2 different projects in the same day. That's really,
Mhm.
really rare. So
What's your scripting process like?
I do full script. I generally go in order. I start with page 1 and I finish with page 20 or 40 or whatever.
Yeah.
Tend to not bounce around too much. I write all the panel descriptions and the dialogue in the order that I'm doing it. Um, like I say, I think that's just more of that sort of organization, uh, just kind of how my brain is wired. I have done plot first in the past. My Hawkman run, the first 12 issues with Brian Hitch were plot
Mhm.
first, and that was a really great experience. And then I came into the dialogue after. Um, but most of the time, the publishers I work with are looking for full script,
Mhm.
and very often the artists are too. So that's generally how I tend to do it.
What was the biggest difference between when you did it plot first?
I think you lose a lot of that interiority,
Mm.
in the individual panel descriptions. You're more kind of just describing what the moods are in a scene, but maybe
Mhm.
not beat to beat. Um, but Brian Hitch coming in behind that, I mean, I could find the words to describe what a phenomenal storyteller he is. And so um, after writing the first issue and seeing him do the art,
Mhm.
I quickly realized there's absolutely nothing that he's not going to be able to draw. And that really opened up the story in terms of possibilities, being able to really go to far-flung locations. And every issue he was on a different planet with a different
Mhm.
culture and different buildings and different costumes and different everything. And he's designing all these things on the fly. And I'm not going in and describing my thoughts on that or whatever in a plot for the
Mhm.
script. I'm just saying, like, we're on Krypton, and
Yeah.
he's just going wild with it. And so um, he's a big DC fan, and he's very steeped in the continuity of these characters too. And so just a huge asset to have on a book like that. And yeah, so I think that would probably be what it is the most. Yeah.
Mhm. When it came to Planet Death and seeing those designs come back, what was something that really stood out to you?
I love the armor, the
Mm.
armor, and also the first double page spread. It's pages 10 and 11 where we see the giant ship for the first time. I mean, it almost looks like a giant gun flying through
Yeah, I've
space.
seen that panel, it's really cool.
And it's just so cool. Tomas has this. He brings this great aesthetic to the book, where everything feels very heavy and substantial in terms of the armor and the muscles and the guns and the ships, but also has this kind of griminess to it.
Mhm.
Like you get the sense that humanity's kind of on its last legs a little bit, and nothing here is new and shiny and bright. Um, so yeah, those would be the things I really liked. Yeah.
Mhm. No, it gives a different energy than the kind of, like, Star Trek type future where everything's really streamlined and sleek and that
For
kind of
sure.
thing.
Or Star Wars is like that too, right? Like Star Wars is very kind of bright and sleek in a lot of ways, but um, Tomas, he really kind of gets into everything looks like it's kind of dinged up and rusted
Yeah.
and been through a few battles, and that's a cool place to be.
So when it came to the theme for Planet Death, what were you trying to work through?
The idea of family and
Mhm.
what people do to get back to their family. Everybody knows what it feels like to be away from home, whether
Mhm.
for work or whatever reason. How important family is and how much a family can be a driving motivator in a person's life and lead them to do incredible things. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, that was the thing.
Mhm. Do you feel like when you get to work in it in a genre like sci-fi, you get to kinda push it in some kinda different directions?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's the great sort of benefit of working with sci-fi is you're able to be a bit more inventive with things and put people in scenarios that
Mhm.
they would not have been in if they were here on Earth.
Mhm.
So, yeah, definitely, um, you're able to sort of craft the environments
Mhm.
and the antagonists and all those kinds of things to uh, help bolster whatever that theme is that you're working
Mhm.
on. Yeah.
Was there anything kinda fun you got to create for this universe?
Yeah, boy, how would I? Because we haven't seen it yet, so I don't want to give too much. Issue 3, there is an oasis
Mhm.
on the alien world that Corporal Scott comes across, and Tomas hasn't drawn it yet, so I don't
Yeah.
know. He's probably working on that scene right now, literally. But so I don't know how it's going to come out, other than knowing that it's going to come out great.
Mhm.
And so I'm excited to see that, and for people to see that too. It's a really, 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 really good sequence. What we do in that oasis, and what happens between some of the characters and things.
Mhm. Well, I think that people are going to be really excited to check it out when they get the chance to. And I want to thank you so much for taking some time to discuss it and much more with all of us.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Sasha. And like I say, July 9th,
Yes.
wherever comic books are sold. So hope people enjoy it.
Thanks so much, everybody who made it to the end, and to Robert Venditti for stopping by to chat comics and Planet Death. Be sure to check out some of the works we talked about, and of course, there'll be more videos coming soon, and I'll see you there. Bye-bye.